Good afternoon, and welcome to the International Poetry Forum. We are so happy to have you here. I just spoke with someone that did not know the draft was happening this week, but did know this event was happening this week. We have lots of good news, the best news being that we have one of my personal favorite poets of all time to join us here today. We'll have our introduction for Rita Dove by a local poet, Soni Tonome, who directs one of our peer organizations, Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures, and is a debut poet with the same press that launched Rita here in Pittsburgh. So you'll hear an intro from him in a moment. But two quick housekeeping items. One is we had a fortuitous mistake at the printers. They sent way too many of this beautiful, beautiful poster created by Arden, one of our student design interns. It has a little QR code as the tea bag. She's going to the New York Times this summer to do design, so well done on the beautiful poster. But we have a few hundred extra of these. They are poster quality, absolutely beautiful. So we have a couple hundred on the way out. Feel free to take them. If you'd like to support our organization, we're a nonprofit. We launched here in 1966 with a reading on this very stage by Archibald MacLeish. We do a lot of high school programs, develop some online content for poetry education, and host this reading series. So you can follow the QR code to find us. We are supported mostly by small donors, so just a tremendous thank you to everyone here who has supported us. And the final announcement is we have just a few tickets left. On April 28th, there will be the world premiere, the first public reading of the new Gilgamesh translation, the 4,000-year-old poem. The Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom, Simon Armitage, is going to be coming. That will not be here. That will be over on the University of Pittsburgh's campus at Hines Memorial Chapel. So you can also find information for that on our website. But without further ado, thank you once again for coming. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Soni Tonome.
Thank you. Hello, welcome to the International Poetry Forum. My name is, as Jake mentioned, Soni Tonome, and Jake has kindly asked me to open this space with a poem of mine and welcome you all. The seer sits on the ground on the eve of the Bwakaima ceremony. Weary traveler, if upon this ground you stumble 200 years later, and if you're of the kind, make a libation. Not that this land is sacred, no gods have roamed it, nor have demons, but men have, and so have women, curse and bless not unlike you. If the blood in your veins does not run, do not blaspheme their death. No sacrifice is ever wasted, for on the other side of the wall, someone is dying of thirst. The water you pour and the tree you mend will one day provide shade to another soul. So, as you rest and breathe here, know someone could have been saved. Now it is an honor to introduce Rita Dove. Thank you. Rita Dove is one of the most celebrated poets in American letters. Born in Akron, a city I know very well, Dove is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, the Fulbright Lifetime Achievement Medal, and the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize. She served as the Poet Laureate of the United States from 1993 to 1995, and is the only poet ever to have received both the National Humanities Medal and the National Medal of Arts, in addition to dozens of other awards and honorary degrees. Dove's early collections were published here in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University Press, including her Pulitzer-winning Thomas and Beulah. Her latest book is Playlist for the Apocalypse, published by Norton in 2021. Samuel Hezo, founder of the International Poetry Forum, once called her a poet of necessity who never compromises, who gives us a real sense of what poetry is. Please help me give a warm Pittsburgh welcome to Rita Dove to the International Poetry Forum.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony, for that beautiful introduction and for that warm Pittsburgh welcome. I feel like I have come home because I was born in Akron, Ohio, and though I have lived in Charlottesville, Virginia for longer than any other place in my life, when I came back here, I felt like I was stepping home again. So it feels good. Once a Midwesterner, always a Midwesterner. I would, in honor of that, actually, I'd like to start with a poem that takes place in my old neighborhood in Akron, Ohio. One of the first things that, one of the first places, I should say, that I was allowed to go without any supervision was the public library. I could walk there to my branch library, and the only rule was that we had to read the books we got. We didn't have to give book reports or anything like that, but we had to read them and or come up with a good reason for why we didn't. Most of the time I didn't need any excuses, and I was allowed to go anywhere I wanted in the library, for which I am so grateful. When I wanted to wander into the adult section because I wanted to read a French book, my parents had to write a note saying, let her read whatever she wants. I think their philosophy was if it was too old for me, I wouldn't understand it and get bored. If I read it on, I needed to read it. Maple Valley Branch Library, 1967. For a 15-year-old, there was plenty to do. Browse the magazines, slip into the adult section to see what vast tristesse was born of rush hour traffic, décolletés, and the plague of too much money. There was so much to discover: how to lay out a road, the language of flowers, and the place of women in the tribe of Mosht. There were equations elegant as a French twist, fractal geometries unwinding maple leaf. I could follow, step by step, the slow disclosure of a pineapple jello mold, or take the path of Harold's purple crayon through the bedroom window and onto a lavender spill of stars. Oh, I could walk any aisle and smell wisdom, put a hand out to touch the rough curve of bound leather, the harsh parchment of dreams. As for the improbable librarian with her salt and paprika upsweep, her British accent and sweater clip, mom of a kid I knew from school, I'd go up to her desk and ask for help on bareback rodeo or binary codes, phonics, Gestalt theory, lead poisoning in the late Roman Empire, the play of light in Dutch Renaissance painting. I would claim to be researching pre-Columbian pottery or Chinese foot binding, but all I wanted to know was, tell me what you've read that keeps that half smile afloat above the collar of your impeccable blouse. So I read Gone with the Wind because it was big, and haiku because they were small. I studied history for its rhapsody of dates, lingered over Cubist art for the way it showed all sides of a guitar at once. All the time in the world was there, and sometimes all the world on a single page. As much as I could hold on my plastic card's imprint, I took greedily. 6 books, 6 volumes of bliss, the stuff we humans are made of, words and sighs and silence, ink and whips, Brahma and cosine, corsets and poetry, and blood sugar levels. I carried it home, past 5 blocks of aluminum siding and the old garage where, on its boarded-up doors, someone had scrawled, "I can eat an elephant if I take small bites." Yes, I said, to no one in particular, that's what I'm gonna do. So, thank you. Thank you. You can hear me in the back, is it all right? Is it okay? Just do something if you can't, okay? All right, okay. And you don't have to clap all the time. Just let it go. I always create a list of poems that I want to read, and then I change it utterly, right before I get on. But I did have an opportunity to talk with some students and interns, and I asked them what poems they would like me to read, and so I'm going to be interspersing a few of them. But this is one actually that I thought about reading. It's called Dawn Revisited. Imagine you wake up with a second chance. The blue jay hawks his pretty wares, and the oak still stands, spreading glorious shade. If you don't look back, the future never happens. How good to rise in sunlight, in the prodigal smell of biscuits, eggs, and sausage on the grill. The whole sky is yours to write on, blown open to a blank page. Come on, shake a leg. You'll never know who's down there frying those eggs if you don't get up and see. Now, I am a night person, so, they can fry those eggs a long time, and I may not be up for it. Family reunions when I was growing up were barbecue affairs. And that was an opportunity for the larger family, all the cousins and people to come together. And there were, of course, kind of competitions, who made the best coconut cake, that kind of thing. But what was wonderful about these reunions that I remember was that something happened to language when we all got together, because though most of my extended family was in Akron and in Cleveland, and some in Youngstown, they all came up from the South, or their grandparents, and sometimes the very grandparents who were there had come up from the South as part of the Great Migration in the 20s. And so when we all got together, everybody's language began to get Southernized. It was kind of wonderful. Family reunion. 30 seconds into the barbecue, my Cleveland cousins have everyone speaking Southern, broadened vowels and dropped consonants, whoops and caws. It's more osmosis than magic, a sliding thrall back to a time when working the tire factories meant entire neighborhoods coming up from Georgia or Tennessee, accents helplessly intact, while their children, inflections flattened to match the field they thought they were playing on, knew without asking when it was safe to roll out a drawl. Just as it's understood, potluck means resurrecting the food we've abandoned along the way for the sake of sleeker thighs. I look over the yard to the porch with its battalion of aunts, the wavering ranks of uncles at the grill. Everywhere else, hordes of progeny are swirling and my cousins yakking on as if they were waist deep in quicksand, but like the books recommend, aren't moving until someone hauls them free. Who are all these children? Who had them, and with whom? Through the general coffee tones, the shame genetics cut a creamy swath. Cherokee's burnt umber transposed onto generous lips. A glance flares gray above the crushed nose we label anonymous African. It's all there, the beautiful geometry of Mendel's peas and their grim logic. And though we remain clearly divided on the merits of okra, there's still time to demolish the cheese grits and tear into slow-cooked ribs so tender we agree they're worth the extra pound or two our menfolk swear will always bring them home. Pity the poor soul who lives a life without butter. Those pinched knees and tennis shoulders and hatchety smiles. My mother passed away in 2019, and as we were going through her effects, I came across this photo of her right before she was married with her girlfriends out on the town. It was right after the end of World War II, and they were dialed up. Girls on the Town, 1946. This is for Elvira Horde Dove. You love a red lip. The dimples are extra currency, though you take care to keep powder from caking those charmed valleys. Mascara? Check. Blush? Oh yes. And a hat is never wrong, except evenings in the clubs. There, a deeper ruby and smoldering eye will do the trick with tiny embellishments, a ribbon or jewel, perhaps a flower, if one is feeling especially flirty or sad. Until Rosie fired up her rivets, flaunting was a male prerogative. Now, you and your girls have lacquered up and pinned on your tail feathers, fit to sally forth and trample each plopped heart quivering at the tips of your patent leather Mary Janes. This is the only power you hold on to, ripped from the dreams none of you believe are worth the telling. Instead of mumbling, why not decorate? Even in dim light, how you glister, slow-eyed, your smile in flames. In the last years of her life, my mother was pretty non-responsive and catatonic. My father and my brother took care of her in Ohio, and I would call in the evenings and talk to my brother, and occasionally would get a word from my mother. This poem is called Eurydice Turning, and Eurydice, if I'll just remind you, it was one of those myths that always interested me, because Orpheus, who was her husband and her lover, was renowned for his singing and for his playing. He was a poet. And when she died, they said that he could bring her back from the dead as long as he didn't turn around. She would be following him. And he hears her voice calling him, and he turns at the last minute, and she goes back. Eurydice Turning. Each evening I call home, and my brother answers. Each evening my rote patter, his unfailing cheer, until he swivels, leans in, louder. It's your daughter, Mom. Want to say hello to Rita? My surprise each time that he still asks, believes in asking. Hello, Rita. A good day, then, the voice as fresh as I remember. I close my eyes to savor it, but don't need the dark to see her younger than my daughter now, wasp-waisted in her home-sewn coral satin, with all of bebop yet to boogie through. No wonder Orpheus, when he heard the voice he'd played his lyre for in the only season of his life that mattered, could not believe she was anything but who she had always been to him, for him. Silence, open air. I know what's coming. Wait for my brother's, "Okay, now say goodbye, Mom," and her parroted reply, "Goodbye, Mom." That lucid, ghastly singing. I put myself back into a trance and keep talking. Weather, gossip, news. I'm going to switch this up and take us back a few years from that. And a few years before my mother went out in the clubs, the year is 1940. And it is, and the place is Hollywood, California. The year before, the movie Gone with the Wind had come out, and Hattie McDaniel, a wonderful African-American actress who played a multitude of maids in all of the films, because that was all that they could feel she was safe to include in. She had played the maid in Gone with the Wind and had won the very first Oscar for an African American for Best Actress in Supporting Role. Now, you have to imagine that the Academy Awards, there were no red carpets. What they had at that time, she walked around a corner and up a sidewalk into the coconut grove where they were being held. So this is Hattie. Hattie McDaniel arrives at the coconut grove, late, in aqua and ermine, gardenias scaling her left sleeve in a spasm of scent, her gloves white, her smile chastened, purse giddy with stars and rhinestones clipped to her brilliantined hair. On her free arm, that fine Negro, Mr. Wonderful Smith. That was his name, really. It's the day that isn't, February 29th. At the end of the shortest month of the year, and the shittiest too, everywhere except Hollywood, California, where the maid can wear mink and still be a maid, bobbing her bandaged head and cursing the white folks under her breath as she smiles and shoos their silly daughters in from the night dew. What can she be thinking of, striding into the ballroom where no black face has ever showed itself except above a serving tray? Hi-hat Hattie, Mama Mac, her haughtiness, the little lady from Showboat whose name Bing forgot, Beulah and Bertha and Melina and Carrie and Violet and Cynthia and Fidelia, one half of the dark Barrymores. Dear Mammy, we can't help but hug you, crawl into your generous lap, tease you with arch innuendo, so we can feel that much more wicked and youthful and sleek. But oh, what we forgot. The 4 husbands, the phantom pregnancy, your famous parties, your celebrated icebox cake. Your giggle above the red petticoats rustle, black girl and white girl walking hand in hand down the railroad tracks in Kansas City, 6 years old. The man who advised you, now that you were famous, to begin eliminating your more common acquaintances, and your reply catching him square in the eye. That's a good idea. I'll start right now by eliminating you. Is she or isn't she? 3 million dishes, a truckload of aprons and head rags later, and here you are, poised between husbands and factions, no corset wide enough to hold you in, your huge face a dark moon split by that spontaneous smile, your trademark, your curse. No matter, Hattie. It's a long, beautiful walk into that flower-smothered standing ovation. So go on and make them wait. Thank you. I was asked when I first moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, which, if you don't know the history of it, is a place that the University of Virginia was founded by Thomas Jefferson, designed by Thomas Jefferson, built by slaves, as Thomas Jefferson watched from his house on the hill. And it's a place that is fraught with all of the, I guess you could almost say, the schizophrenia of this country, right? Which made it for me an incredible place to be. And I think everyone expected me to write something about it, which of course meant that I wasn't going to write anything about it for a long time until I could feel this place. And so many, many years later, this poem appeared. It's in my latest book, in fact. It is about, or spoken by, I should say, the bell ringer, man who used to be the bell ringer in the rotunda at the University of Virginia. Now, his name was Henry Martin. He was born on the day that Jefferson died. He had been a former slave, and he, at that time, no one had smartphones and wrist or watches. Time was done by the clock. So he rang this bell for over 50 years. The poem is called Bell Ringer, and the epigraph is from Henry Martin. He says, "I am as true to that bell as to my God." Bell ringer. I was given a name. It came out of a book. I don't know which. I've been told the great man could recite every title in order on its shelf. Well, I was born, and that's a good thing, although I arrived on the day of his passing, a day on which our country fell into mourning. This I heard over and over, from professors to farmers, even dual-scarred students, sometimes in grand company, remarked upon in third person. A pretty way of saying more than two men in a room means the third can be ignored, as I was when they spoke of my birth and Mr. Jefferson's death in one breath. Voices dusted with wonderment, faint sunlight quivering on a hidden breeze. I listen in on the lectures whenever I can, holding still until I disappear beyond third person. And what I hear sounds right enough. It eases my mind. I know my appearance frightens some of the boys, the high cheeks and freckles and not quite Negro eyes flaring gray as storm-washed skies back home. It shames them to be reminded. So much for book learning. I nod as if to say, "Uncle Henry at your service," then continue on my way through darkness to start the day. This is my place, stone rookery perched above the citadels of knowledge, alone with the bats and my bell, keeping time. Up here, molten glory brims until my head's rinsed clear. I am no longer a dreadful coincidence, nor a debt crossed off on a dead man's ledger. I am not summoned, dismissed. I am the clock's keeper. I ring in their ears. And every hour, down in that shining, blistered republic, someone will pause to whisper, Henry. And for a moment, my name flies free. I was talking with some students beforehand, and I know that some of them have been working on and reading Ars Poetica. You know, why do you write? How do you write? I felt the pressure to write Ars Poetica for a while, and I think that many of the poems, that some of them that you've heard, Dawn Revisited and everything, when I read them now, I realize, yeah, they're Ars Poetica. They're all about, you know, stepping up into this magic space. But there is a poem that is titled Ars Poetica, which I'll read to you now. It's a kind of an anti-Ars Poetica, I think. Ars Poetica. I should preface this by saying that at the time that I wrote this, just so you can get an idea of the landscape, I was living and teaching in Arizona, a desert landscape. Ars Poetica. 30 miles to the only decent restaurant was nothing, a blink in the long, dull stare of Wyoming. Halfway there, the unknown but terribly important essayist yelled, "Stop, I want to be in this," and walked 15 yards onto the land before sky bore down and he came running, crying, "Jesus, there's nothing out there." I once met an Australian novelist who told me he never learned to cook because it robbed creative energy. What he wanted most was to be mute. He stacked up pages. He entered each day with an axe. What I want is this poem to be small, a ghost town on the larger map of wills. Then you can pencil me in as a hawk. A traveling X marks the spot. I realize there's a corollary to that Ars Poetica that is also a kind of an anti-Ars Poetica. I should read it now. And it was due to, and I owe it to a student of mine. This student was a student of mine when I was teaching in Arizona, and he loved to write prose poems. In fact, he wrote exclusively prose poems. And I would, in the role of a teacher and a mentor and a kind of a devil's advocate, I would rib him all the time and say, you know, prose poems, huh? Are these really prose? Are they poems at all? Are you writing prose? So we had a running thing going on like that. And when he graduated, he actually went and started a magazine, a little magazine of prose poems, featuring prose poems, and wrote to me and said, you should write a prose poem for my magazine. And I said, I don't even know if I believe in prose poems. Haven't you figured that out yet? Of course, I was teasing him, and so I then wrote this poem. And so, with apologies to all the prose writers out there, I write prose as well, and all writing is hard. That's all I can say. But prose in a small space. It's supposed to be prose if it runs on and on, isn't it? All those words, too many to fall into rank and file, stumbling bare-ass drunk onto the field, reporting for duty. Yes, sir, spilling out as shamelessly as the glut from a mega-billion-dollar chemical facility. Just the amount of glittering effluvium it takes to transport a little girl across a room. Beige carpet thick under her Oxfords, curtains blousy with spring. Is that the scent of daffodils drifting in? Daffodils don't smell, but prose doesn't care. Prose likes to hear itself talk. Prose is development and denouement, anticipation hovering near the canopies, lust rampant in the antipasto. For example, a silver fork fingered sadly as the heroine crumples a linen napkin in her lap to keep from crying out at the sight of Lord Campion's regal brow inclined tenderly toward the wealthy young widow. Prose applauds such syntactical dalliances. Then is it poetry if it's confined? Trembling along its axis, a flagpole come alive in high wind, flapping its radiant sleeve for attention. Over here, it's me. While the white spaces, air, field, early morning silence before the school bell, shape themselves around that one bright seizure. And if that's so, what do we have here? A dream or 3 paragraphs? We have white space too. Is this music? As for all the words left out, banging at the gates, we could let them in, but where would we go with our orders, our stuttering pride? So thanks to Morgan, who did that. Charlottesville, Virginia, my hometown, was a sleepy, beautiful college town that no one had ever heard of until some very tragic events a few years back. And now, even if I'm meeting someone in, say, Berlin, Germany, and they say, "Where are you from?" and I say, "Charlottesville, Virginia," they look at me with great pity and say, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I feel like saying, that could have happened anywhere. You just have to be prepared. It can happen anywhere. The tragic events there, the death of Heather Hyatt, and all over the protests of these statues to Confederate soldiers, which couldn't be taken down because of some legal, things. Every time I went downtown, every time I drove past the statue of Robert E. Lee, it was a hard thing to swallow. There was another statue off to the corner with Stonewall Jackson, and both of them are now gone, but this poem was written before they went down. Pedestrian crossing, Charlottesville. A gaggle of girls giggles over the bricks leading off Court Square. We break dutifully and wait, but there's at least 20 of these knob-kneed creatures, blonde and curly, still at an age that thinks impudence is cute. Look how they dart and dither, changing flanks as they lurch along, golden gobbets of infuriating foolishness or pure joy, depending on one's disposition. At the moment, mine is sour. This is taking far too long. Don't they have minders? Just behind my shoulder in the city park, the Southern General still stands, stonewalling us all. When I was their age, I judged Goldilocks nothing more than a pint-sized criminal who flounced into others' lives, then assumed their clemency. Unfair, I know, my aggression, to lump them into a gaggle, silly geese, when all they're guilty of is being young. So far. I really did not like Goldilocks. I did not understand. I thought, well, look at her. She's just breaking and entering, but no. That traveling X marks the spot is something that makes you feel free. And one of the smallest traveling spots that I've been allowed to inhabit is that the persona of a cricket, a spring cricket, because it began because our daughter, when she was in toddler state, would walk through the house despite all the love that we gave her, and would say, nobody loves me but the spring cricket. And we could never figure out who this spring cricket was. And so I began writing poems in his voice. It's a he. She said he was a he. And I would share them with her later as she grew older. She then told me, we came up with an agreement that I would not, she said, you can read them anywhere except within a 50-mile radius of where I am. I said, fair enough. She's lifted the ban now. So here's a couple of spring cricket poems. I know a lot about crickets nowadays. And one of the things, of course, is that it used to be a kind of a ritual to gather crickets together almost like a music box, a traveling music box in some cultures. The spring cricket considers the question of negritude. I was playing my tunes all by myself. I didn't know anybody else who could play along. Sure, the tunes were sad, but sweet, too, and wouldn't come until the day gave out. You know that way the sky has of dangling her last bright wisps? That's when the ache would bloom inside until I couldn't wait. I knelt down to scrape myself clean and didn't care who heard. Then came the shouts and whistles, the roundup into jars, a clamber of legs. Now there were others, tumbled, clouded. I didn't know their names. We were a musical lantern. Children slept to our rasping sighs. And if now and then one of us shook free and sang as he climbed to the brim, he would always fall again, which made them laugh and clap their hands. At least then we knew what pleased them and where the brink was. The spring cricket repudiates his parable of negritude. Hell, we just climbed, reached the lip and fell back, slipped and started up again, climbed to be climbing, sang to be singing. It's just what we do. No one bothered to analyze our blues until everybody involved was strung out or dead. To solve everything that was happening while it was happening would have taken some serious opium. Seriously, all wisdom is afterthought, a sort of helpless relief. So don't go thinking none of this grief belongs to you, even if you don't know how it feels to fall. You can get my drift. And I, who live it daily, have heard that perfect word enough to know just when to use it, as in, oh hell, hell no. No, this is hell. I feel very kind of energized when I can work with another artist across genres or discipline, and where we both have to find a common language and expand our own. One example of this happened a few years ago when the composer Richard Daniel Poor approached me about doing a song cycle that dealt with the last 60 or so years of American history, as seen from the standing witness of the Statue of Liberty. So, 60 years, what the heck, that's not too bad. I thought the man is out of his mind, but it's also a wonderful, wonderful challenge. And so we began this collaboration where I wrote poems and we bounced them back and forth. We bounced phrases back and forth and things like that. So I'll read to you a couple of these poems. There are, I think, 13 or 14 of them. It's been premiered with Susan Graham, a wonderful mezzo-soprano, singing this journey through American history. And of course, the biggest challenge was one of the biggest challenges, I should say, was to try to pick which events do you sing? Which events do you write about throughout that period? And so I'll start with the first one, which is a prologue. Beside the golden door. Surely there must be something beautiful to smile upon. The umbered blue edge of sky as it fades into evening, the brusque green heave of the sea. When I look up, surely there will be a cloud or a lone star dangling. Truth is, the truth has gone walking, left her perch for the doves and ravens to ravage, hightailed it to the hills, to the quiet beyond rivers and trees. No matter what ragged carnival may be thronging the streets, what bleak homestead or plantation of sorrows howling its dominion, truth would say these are arrogant times. Believers slaughter their doubters, while the greedy oil their lips with excuses, and the righteous turn merciless, the merciful mad. The first testimony is 1968. It was a year when many of those who experienced it felt that the end of this country was coming. There were multiple assassinations, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and others, and demonstrations and wars, and it just felt like, more and more madness and cruelty was happening every day. Sound familiar? Here we are. You're tired, you're poor. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken? No more princes for the poor, loss whittling you thin. Grief is the constant now, hope the last word spoken. In a dance of two elegies, which circles the drain? A token year with its daisies and carbines is where we begin. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken its mechanics 101? To keep dreaming when the joke's on you? Well, crazier legends have been written. Grief is the constant now. Hope, the last word spoken on a motel balcony, shouted in a hotel kitchen. No kin can make this journey for you, the roots locked in. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken the bodies of its makers? Beyond the smoke and ashes, what you hear rising is nothing but the wind. Who comforts you? Now that the wheel has broken, grief is the constant. Hope, the last word spoken. It gets darker and darker and darker. I'm not going to do that to us on a sunny afternoon, except to say that, you have that, what art does for, I think for me and for many of us sometimes, it can be about the darkest moments, but somehow it also lifts you up. It makes you feel like, because there is someone else out there who is articulating what you're going through and what you're feeling. You're not alone in that regard. So I feel. Yeah. My students teach me too. And in one of my classes, they came to me and they said, look, you're giving us every semester, you give your students something called a wild card. One of my former students is in the audience now. She knows, she can testify to this. And what this is an individualized writing prompt, which when I say individual, it is individualized. I halfway through the semester, so I've kind of gotten a read on the things that that particular poet likes to, or a student likes to do, and devise an exercise that will frustrate them and plunge them someplace where they don't want to go. Yeah, I did to stretch. And they're wild in the sense that sometimes you have to walk out into a field or, and do all sorts of things. I have great fun writing them. I hope that they have great fun doing them. But it can come at any time in the semester because that's how life is. And they said, okay, it's only fair, you need a wild card. You keep giving them to us. And I said, okay, fine. And then I said, well, okay, can I write it myself? And they said, yes, but we have to approve it. Fair enough. And so the wild card that I came up with was that each sentence in the poem had to be alliterative in and of itself. So that meant if the line started with the word like one, then every word in that line had to start with an O. And I thought I was allowed to, I didn't have to be alphabetical, or I thought, oh, this will be, I can do this. I forgot about prepositions. They are rough. And also the way that alliteration makes you kind of hobble through a sentence or stumble through it. And so I began to try to figure out what can I write about. Now, my husband and I have been doing ballroom dancing for years. We've switched over to Argentine tango. It's less impact because that ballroom dancing, liniment, ace bandages, all sorts of stuff. So my wild card is titled Ode to My Right Knee. O obstreperous one, ornery outside of ordinary protocols, paramilitary proby par excellence, every evidence you yield yells. No noise too tough to tackle, tears springing such sudden salt when walking wrenches, haranguer, hag, hanger-on, how much more maddening, insidious imperfection. Membranes matter-of-factly corroding, crazed cartilage calmly chipping away as another arduous ambulation begins, bone bruising bone. Leathery Lothario, lone laboring gladiator, grappling, groveling for favor, fair weather forecaster, fickle friend, jive jiggy joint. Kindly keep kicking. Thank you. Thank you. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis many years ago, actually about 20 years ago. Did not tell anyone because my parents were aged and they were going through some dilemmas of their own, and I knew that it would worry them too much. And so I kept quiet, and but I wrote the poems. I've often been asked by students, say, well, I want to write this poem, but it might, hurt someone else, or it might engage someone else, and I don't know what to do. And I said, well, you may not have a choice about writing it, but you do have a choice about showing it to someone for a while, but you may have to write it. So these poems are in a section of my book playlist called Little Book of Woe. And in this poem, which is the first one, it's the moment when I got the diagnosis over the phone. I must say now that, thanks to the miracle of some amazing pharmaceuticals, I'm doing very well. So, soup. When the doctor said, I've got good news and bad news, I thought of soup, how long it had been since I had had the homemade kind, the real deal where you soak the beans overnight and everything is apportioned in stages. First the onions and meat browned in oil, then the broth added for hours of simmering, all that saturated, glistening scent stoking the house with memories. The Jewish boy I kissed until we both sank to our knees in the grass, my mother's frown as she plucked weeds from my hair. Oh, my mother will die from this, my mother whose soup is the best, even though it was always over-salted because it was labored over. It was ladled out unconditionally, tendered sweetly without consequences, a non-judicial love. And it was always soup I got first thing in the sick bed, and there's the way tomatoes are added at the last moment, but the minor vegetables, peas and corn and tiny diced potatoes, come in 30 minutes before that. And how the spices, the spices, are to be doled out sparingly, then waiting to see how strong they become in the brew, their hidden aptitudes unlocked only by time and the heat of a burbling melange. And the way my apron always got stained, but I wouldn't wash it, proud of the mess for once, making mistakes, sloshing and dripping. Yes, soup was what I wanted. Not news, but the slow courage of the lentil as it softened, its heart splitting into wings. Not good cop, bad cop, but the swift metallic smack of too much time administered hastily, the kind of mistake you never make again. Bread, too, I wanted the whole thick, crusty hump of it, laid out for vivisection. Here is my body, eat. And lots of red wine that always feels like it's greasing my bones with lava. Here is my blood. And then the bad news came. Whoever listens to the good. And before I answered, before the questions and the arched eyebrow of my husband standing in the doorway could fall into pity and helplessness, I thought, yes, I'll make soup tonight, a soup fit for the gods. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to leave time for questions. I would like, though, to end with a new poem. I think it's always good to make the new ones come out and say their piece. And this is actually a very, very new poem. Again, it was prompted by a request to do a reading with some other poets, and we were to read humorous poems. And, everyone thinks of poets as being so sad. And we are, but we also know how to laugh about it. And besides, comedians are perhaps the biggest pessimists in the world, if you think about it. So this is my contribution to that evening. It gets sad at the end, and I want to thank you all. It's called Just Kidding. A priest, a rabbi, and a poet walk into a bar. And we're laughing already, calculating their clashing philosophies. New Testament, the Torah, W.B. Yeats. All the earnest sacraments undertaken in the name of world harmony, loaves and fishes, bitter herbs, the spread offered at the free buffet. We've even uploaded their wardrobes. Dog collar, skull cap, jeans and elbow patch tweed. As we wait for the next line, that classic setup for ridicule, because we know the poet's going to be the one to rip the sucker apart. It's always the last one inside who gets the biggest laugh. But we've forgotten the bar. There it stands, waiting to be leaned on, a gleaming walnut shoulder anointed with scotch and spittle. Poor bar, elbowed, drooled over, kicked and beslobbered, its whiskey ring tattoos a parade of evenings lost to sorrow, to rage, the occasional pickup. Are you uncomfortable yet? Itching in your seat, muttering, where's the fun in this? It's the poet's doing. They can turn bread into Zwieback wine into vinegar, claim edification in the name of one lousy epiphany. When is it coming, the goddamn punchline? Oh, there goes one to the gut. A priest, a rabbi, and a poet at the bar. What it'll be, old-fashioned, Negroni, Moscow Mule, you decide. They don't speak. They aren't acquainted. They just happen to need something stronger than what's out there and walk into the same establishment at the same time, 10 p.m., where the bartender, wiping away the previous patron's ablutions, asks, "What's your poison?" To which the priest thinks, "Angel's envy." The rabbi murmurs, "Killer whale." The poet sighs, "I've drawn a blank, just fill me up." And the bartender sets down their drinks with a half-mast salute to these disparate, desperate creatures who already know they're the butt of the joke and gamely take the hit. Thank you all.
Thank you once again. I just want to start by saying that Pittsburgh is so proud of you. The fact that your earliest works were published here, everyone loves to claim you in the city. I had a high school teacher, the late John Manor at Seton LaSalle, who's really into the local publishing scene and drilled that into us. So I know that he would have been as starstruck as I am now sitting with you. So it's such an honor. But I wonder, I recognize many faces in the crowd. If we haven't met, my name is Jake Greffenstedt. I'm the director of the International Poetry Forum. We're a nonprofit reading series that was announced almost exactly 60 years ago today. Wow. So we're coming up on our 60th anniversary season. So this is a really special time. But the thing that has made this series has always been the audience, and it's been such a joy getting to know so many of the poets here. So I wanted just to start by asking you about your earliest days as a poet, working with Carnegie Mellon University Press. What was it like getting your very first book out into the world?
It's still a thrill. I look back on that, and I can still feel that little thrill when I got the letter of acceptance from Jerry Costanzo, and we came here, my husband and I, to look at the book, and I can't even explain how exciting it is. And what was so wonderful about those early days, too, is that Jerry was so good at, and the whole press was so great at making me feel that I had come into a family. I didn't feel like I was going to be kind of oppressed. They listened to me in terms of a cover, and we talked about it. Actually talked about it. I mean, years later when I was doing my novel, and which was published with Pantheon, division of Knopf and all that, and then I encountered some of the horror stories that you get where somebody does a cover, and you go, no, that has nothing to do with me. And in fact, I had to say, in that case, I said, well, if I have to do this cover, I'm going to put a brown paper bag around it. I'm going and just say there's nothing. And they finally had to capitulate. But imagine if that had been the first book. No, I felt like I had a place I could come to, and it was incredible. It really was. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for first-time authors who are working on their first chapbook or collection in terms of things to hone their practice and hone their manuscript to get it out into the world?
Ooh. It's different for everyone. I think that everybody does it differently. If you're doing something, if you're writing something which is a project, and you have, well, then that's one thing. If you're working on poems, not to try to make it into a book until it demands to be made, until the poems say, I need to be with that poem, I need to be with this one. Every time when I work on a book, there's a point where I print out all the poems and put them on the floor, and I walk around and I sit among them and I talk, and anyone would think I'm a mad woman because I'm saying, oh, so you don't like your company over there? Well, then where you want to go? It's because there is a point where I think in a book where once you start to put it together, you can see that you need something there. There's a hole there. And that might inspire a poem. If you do it too early, then you're forcing, poems out to fill a space, and that's not good, I think. I also think that when you're working on your first chapbook or book, or when you do this, there is such a tyranny of seeing, for the poet, I think for the creator, of seeing your work printed. It tends to freeze then. I mean, sometimes it's thrilling, but it's also, so if it's not ready to go there, don't make it go there, because you'll never get it out of that freezing state at that early stage. If you are working on a book and it's almost done, make sure that you also have part of another book done. Make sure that you're already working on something else, so that when it comes out, you're already somewhere else. All right, you're already doing something else. That's all.
I love that idea of necessity of a book needing to exist. When Seamus Heaney visited the series 5 times, and during his second visit, he talked about what makes a masterpiece. And he says it's a poem where every line is such that you couldn't imagine it being other than what it is. And you teach, you write, so you obviously just have this tremendous exposure to the great poets of history. Are there any poets that come to mind that were maybe particularly influential for you, where you think of a collection or just the poet as a whole, where you think there's not a syllable that could be changed? This poet is really it for me.
Well, I mean, the first poet that did that for me was Blake. And the second was Shakespeare. I still go back, I mean, it's just something. A poet who really, who worked for me, I mean, it's so interesting, because I think often the poets that can influence you are not the ones that someone thinks you sound like, so it's a little difficult. But James Wright and Derek Walcott, particularly Omeros, his masterpiece, and Sylvia Plath, which I think there can be things that could be changed, but it would then alter the passion and the fury that goes through. So that to be taught that sometimes it is not about the precise, and she was very precise, but she was also very clear about how she was going to overstep, I'll just leave it like that. There's so many, and usually a lot of times it's like it can be a single poem that just happened to hit me at the right time. For instance, and this is an odd one, but I read Robert Penn Warren's Audubon, A Vision. Now you think, Robert Penn Warren, what? But it's a book-length cycle. Audubon is not not the kind of hero you want in this. He's a misogynist, he's racist, he's everything like that, but he's also this observer. These spare, extremely lyrical meditations on the wilderness of the United States, and that he could actually bring me into that. Everything in my real everyday life would have hated that man, right? But the poems are amazing, and in a certain way, it also helped me with Thomas and Beulah, because they're very interior. It's all in his head. He's out there alone in this wilderness, and it's all going through his head. And one of the things about Thomas and Beulah I wanted to get at was that ordinary people have intense and complicated thoughts going on all the time in their lives, and so that helped too. There's so many.
Wow, students, I hope you're writing that down. That is a phenomenal list. I'm glad you opened with Blake. I'm reading that to my 3-year-old, who I told you wants to be a poet and a chef. And a reading also to our newborn. So different version of the question, the newborn I think is too young to understand any of the language, but so we're looking for sort of sonically interesting poets right now. Is there a poet you would recommend for for my newborn Millie?
A sonically interesting poet. Oh, don't do this to me. No, I think your newborn will tell you which poets are sonically interesting by either paying attention and imitating them, babbling, or just, demanding something else to eat. Because you can't, they're trying to figure it out. I'm going to try to answer that in a different way. When our daughter was born, my husband is German. We got all this advice about how to raise her bilingually. Some said, only speak a certain language here, don't mix the languages or they'll get mixed up. One of our good friends was Greek, and he said, don't worry about it. Listen to this. Now, this is a toddler. He began to talk to her in Greek. And she did this. She looked at him, and she was babbling. She wasn't talking at this stage. She began to babble in Greek. She began to babble, imitating those cadences. She was trying to figure out, okay, this is a different language. He switched to German. She babbled in those kind of rhythms. So your newborn is going to figure out what's interesting to her, And it may not be it's later that they get interested in Dr. Seuss or anything like that, because that has meaning in the language built into the sonics, But right now you're looking for sonics.
Well, I read her some T.S. Eliot. She cried, but she's a... I love Eliot, but you can imagine why a baby would be disturbed. She's a huge fan of your work, and my 3-year-old is as well, especially because with the poet-chef combination, right? You may have heard the quotation from G.K. Chesterton that poets have been mysteriously silent on the subject of cheese. But of course, there are great poets who really engage with food, and we had the incredible line from you today that pity the soul who lives a life without butter. So we received a number of emails asking really specific questions. Do you cook? What's your favorite ice cream flavor? And do you go from food to a poem or vice versa?
I have poems. I have one poem where I'm reading as a child or as a teenager. I'm reading Shakespeare, and there were specific foods for certain plays, and it really was true. I did have certain foods that I liked to eat when I was reading Macbeth or something like that. Let me see. What was the question?
There are a few different ones. Favorite ice cream flavor was one that.
Yeah. My favorite is nostalgic, and that was my father's grape sherbet. And it was, in fact, I even wrote a poem about it because it was everything was unlikely. It was so, the color, the taste, yeah.
I suspect that's why the student asked that question.
Yeah,
That's a beautiful. If you've not read this poem, highly recommend. It's outstanding. And the final question I wanted to ask is about your current work on your memoir, and in the context of stories. So, Orpheus and Eurydice was one of a number of mythological stories, but also you talked about some stories from American history today. So, are there any stories from mythology or history that are informing your approach towards memoir, or are you trying to stay as isolated as possible?
I hadn't thought about that. Though there are, because I did grow up, I read those Greek, particularly the Greek myths, and had my arguments with them and my conversations with them as I grew up. They're part of my personal mythology, as well as other things from the Bible to Aesop's fables, for that matter, and Grimm's fairy tales. So they're everywhere in my work, and I don't recognize it sometimes until much later. I go, oh, there it is, or there is something. And with the memoir, the difference is that it's such a different, and I think difficult, as all writing is, genre, because one is trying to say, okay, all of the masks and the constraints are down. They really aren't, but you say that, and you try to be honest. And whereas my life, or anything that's happening in my life, can often be filtered through a myth, or maybe a lie, in a poem or something like that. In the memoir, I can't do that. So my memoir is not chronological, and there are places where poems appear, documents appear, all sorts of evidences of the life. And so it's difficult for me to say, I'm sure they are, but it's difficult for me to say, what myths or what things are informing it, except for that notion that we accumulate evidences, I guess, or exhibits in our lives, and then it forms us in that kind of kaleidoscopic way.
Well, thank you. I do have one more question. I forgot I promised a student to ask a quick one, which is, you basically have EGOT status of having won the whole fleet of major awards. You were on the all-star team for the Poet Laureate. So Rita Dove served as the Poet Laureate of our country, but then in 1999-2000 was also special laureate for the 200th anniversary Library of Congress, alongside W.S. Merwin, alum of our series, and Louise Glick. The question that I'm glad I remember I promised a student to ask is there a award of which you are most proud that you've received in your lifetime?
Oh my gosh. No. I would say the Pulitzer, because it was probably the first major one, and therefore the most surprising. And my parents, it was legitimization. They finally, not that they were against the poetry, but they couldn't understand this poetry business and how could I earn a living? They actually, I had a job teaching poetry, and though they were supportive and all of that, I think suddenly they said, oh, the world, she's something, I guess. And they were so happy, and I was so happy. So yes, I think that was the thing, to be able to say, look, everything that you believed in me enough to step back, because it wasn't their milieu. My father was a chemist, for God's sake, but they believed enough in me to stay quiet and let me do my thing. And I could say thank you that way, so.
Well, please join me in thanking Rita Dove for coming to the International Poetry Forum.